Being an Asian guy and growing up in the 1980s wasn't easy because, we were victims of racism. It was rife at that time. A lot more so than it is now, and it was a lot more in your face than it is now. And there are a few areas where you don't want to see racism creeping in because it goes both ways. There's white on color racism and there's color on white racism. We all know that to be the case. But when it comes to things like video games, it seems like the gamer mentality lends itself more towards extreme behavior and extreme forms of racism, and it might not be recognizable until someone points it out. Hi, I'm Rob.
And so am I.
Yes, and welcome back to another episode of the Geek Show. There's a topic that's come to my attention, and we kind of touched on this in historical episodes of Impossible Mission and various other things that we've done. But I think it's come to the fore because of a recent game that's come out, Final Fantasy 16. And the weird thing is, the topic of racism in Final Fantasy 16 didn't just raise its head after the game was released. It raised its head before the game was released in two different ways. The first way was when people were criticizing the game for not having people of color. And we'll get more into that in a bit. But the second way was when SkillUp interviewed Naoki Yoshida and others from the dev team, and he referred to Japanese RPGs as JRPGs, and Naoki Yoshida kind of grimaced and went, "We don't like that term."
Yeah, because in its purest sense, racism is othering of people.
Yeah.
And there's nothing more othering than saying, "Oh, it's not a real RPG; it's a JRPG. It's something different. It's othering it."
And the weird thing is, Jimquisition did a video about SkillUp's video and focused in particular on the subject of JRPGs. And in that video, a few very, very valid points were made. Number one, there is no equivalent term in the West for JRPG. There is no Western RPG. It's now been turned into action RPG.
Well, RPG sort of broken up. I can't say that word. It's been broken up into separate things like traditional RPG, isometric RPG, strategy RPG, action RPG,
turn-based RPG.
Yeah,
which
everything.
A lot of people think applies only to JRPGs, but there's plenty of turn-based Western RPGs.
But JRPG isn't a distinction of the style. JRPG is the only thing that's distinct about it is its Japaneseness. And the JRPG could be Disgaea, it could be Final Fantasy 15, it could be one of those ones that's on Nintendo that you always forget. It could be Zelda. It could be all
Zelda.
sorts.
Could be Pokemon. Pokemon is a JRPG, much as people don't like to admit it. The reason why Pokemon doesn't get lumbered with that is because Pokemon is too big. Again, it's a point that Jimquisition made.
JRPG is a term which is derivative and derisory and diminishing and belittling of what Japanese stuff is.
But here's the thing. Dark Souls is a JRPG.
Yes, it is.
Elden Ring is a JRPG. They don't get cast into that group.
No, it's only the negative side of JRPGs that get called JRPGs.
Not only that, it's a specific type of game gets cast into JRPG, and it's always top-down, pixel art, turn-based, long story, long narrative, lots of dialogue, those sorts of games, and they get classified as JRPGs. So you're like, well, okay, fine, but those games are also made by Western developers.
Yeah.
If you look at something like Fell Seal, that's very much a turn-based isometric, dialogue-heavy, narrative-heavy game.
They also use that term for anime RPGs.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of a very it's a very small group of what a Japanese RPG that people think. It's just such a weird term. Japan has just as diverse with RPGs as any other country, but it's it's just so contradictory in so many ways. I mean, even as we were describing it there, I could feel myself and contradicting myself on numerous occasions
Yeah.
because the rules for what people call that make no sense.
And the thing is, we don't call a Korean RPG a KRPG. We don't call a Chinese RPG a CRPG.
No.
It only applies to Japan. The worst part of it, though, is in that Skill Up interview, Naoki Yoshida talks about stuff that happened about 10 to 15 years ago in the West, and
Yeah.
why a lot of Japanese developers soured on the term JRPG. And some of it has to do with people like Phil Fish and Jonathan Blow. There's a video which was in Jimquisition's video, and it does exist on the internet as well, so you can look for it. They're at GDC, and there's a question and answer thing. Phil Fish is on the stage. I think Jonathan Blow might have been there, but there's a Japanese guy stands up, brown face and a sea of white faces, and he asks a question to a developer who he looks up to. He's impressed by what Phil Fish has done with Fez and wants to ask him a very valid question. And in response, Phil Fish, out of sheer arrogance and, I'm sorry, but it is racist, his behaviour, says, "Your games are shit. Games from your country are shit."
Hmm. Yeah, and that must be really hard for that guy because Japanese games developers, because of the way their culture sort of is designed around seniority and
Yeah,
respect, there's a lot of people in that sort of position who are very meek. There's a lot of meek people in the Japanese video game industry.
yeah. But this is the upshot of it, right?
And
You
to
see
hear
it,
that from the brash sort
yeah,
of rock star West when
yeah.
there's a
And
very
this was
meek
at a
Eastern
time.
society.
This was at a time when video game developers were still being hailed as rock stars before all of the crap that started coming out about what was going on at Activision Blizzard and various other
Yeah.
publishers and developers. So yeah, very much the rock star thing. The arrogance of it is kind of astonishing. But
Whereas the
here's
Japanese guy is just a guy who's doing his job.
yeah, here's the thing. The upshot of it was actually a lot of Japanese developers and a lot of Japanese studios doing a sharp left turn, saying, okay, if we want to sell our games in the West, we can't be making the games that we have made traditionally. We can't be going down our own path. We have to adopt more to what the Americans want. And so that's why you end up with games like Final Fantasy 15.
Well,
It's one of the reasons why the
that was
game is a mess.
that's very Korean, though, isn't it? It's K. Well, I say Korean. It's K-pop band, Pretty Boys. Doing a
Yeah,
road
that's
trip.
just that's just a style of character, and that
Yeah,
existed in Japan well before it was in Korea. So I
yeah.
wouldn't apply that.
It's just a joke, really. It's not a
I know
serious
what
assessment of what Final
what
Fantasy 15 was.
what I'm saying is, if you look at Final Fantasy 13 and Final Fantasy 15, right, those two kind of highlight just how much of a sharp turn the Japanese um, game industry made. They started catering more to Western sensibilities. That does also lead to games like Dark Souls and things like that, which is a good thing. But there's also the bad, and a lot of the
Well,
bad was
Dark
made.
Souls is such a. I mean, the original Demon Souls, that was from
A
the.
horrible game.
It's a horrible game, but originally they did it, and I don't know how well it holds up in a
Oh,
PS5.
the remake's very good. It's
But my
just the
point
original
is,
game.
the original game was made by the company that did like the very, very, very Japanese games that were Armored Core. Was it Armored Core or was it
Yeah,
no?
From
And,
Software. And the thing is, they didn't just do Armored Core. They did games like Kingsfield and stuff like that.
yeah,
Those
but those
were kind of
games very Japanese.
yeah. Thing is, Armored Core. Yeah, it's very very menu heavy. Always has been. But I love Armored Core because I love giant robots and mechs. So
Yeah.
you know. But leaving that to one side, spinning on to what's been happening recently, and a lot of this I feel has to do with what's going on in kind of the social zeitgeist, let's say, when it comes to racism on things like TikTok and social media and things like that, and the fact that people don't seem to be aware that the racism can go both ways. That that white on color racism exists, but also color on white racism exists.
I'm not smiling about that. It's just your phrasing left a lot to be desired. But
Yeah, you understand my point, though.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
we've seen it in recent things like the Netflix documentary of Cleopatra.
Which, in case people forgot, it suggested that Cleopatra was black.
Yeah, and that got the Egyptians all riled up, and some of the Greeks as well, because apparently Cleopatra was of Macedonian descent.
Yeah, which is sort of Slavic.
Yeah, well, no, not Slavic, more Greek than Slavic.
Like it's like sort of Bulgaria, North
N-
Europe.
not really. I mean, if you're talking about Greek Macedon, then you're talking about a different thing. What's currently
Yeah,
Macedonia is different from what Macedonia was in ancient times.
yeah. That country's got such a checkered history.
See, that's the thing. What identifies as Macedonia now? They had to pick that name because the Greek government kicked up such a fuss because ancient Macedonia is actually northern Greece,
Hmm.
and that's the thing, you know.
It's moved a lot then, hasn't it? Because it's near Germany now.
Well, it's like north of Greece now, so yeah.
Yeah, it's still near Germany, Rob.
All I'm saying is it's very politicized. There's a lot of stuff there which I'm not going to go into. There's a lot of
Yeah.
geopolitics there. We won't go into that, but it is a very kind of contested thing. What you have to remember though is that the most well-known Macedonian ever. Do you know who it
Hmm.
is?
I'm not going to say anything and embarrass myself. I have ideas, but I'm not going to embarrass myself.
Alexander the Great.
Oh, God. I wasn't going to embarrass myself.
Alexander the Great was, the son of Philip II of Macedon, who was the king of Macedonia at
But
that
we're
time.
getting besides the point.
Yeah.
What you're taking a long way around to talk about is
The point I'm making is if Cleopatra was of Macedonian descent, when you think of Alexander the Great, you don't think someone with an afro.
No, you don't. The point is not to reduce black people to afros, just get out there.
Yeah.
Point is you're talking about Final Fantasy 16 and this suggestion of it everybody being white and there's nobody of colour.
Yeah, basically. And it was something that was touched on in the run up to the game's release. And it's something that has been talked about a lot after the game's release. And I feel that it's been talked about very, very unfairly. And by people who don't really understand what they're talking about. Yes, I am calling you all out.
That's the internet though, Rob. People have a big check and
someone did a video
you know what I mean.
someone did a video where they basically have said that Final Fantasy 16 has set video games back by about 60 years. I'm like, well, video games weren't really a thing 60 years ago for a start. So number one, that's an error in your video. And number two, I don't think it's as harsh as you're saying because the whole thing has to do with these characters in Final Fantasy 16 called bearers, who are basically slaves. They're a slave race, right?
Yeah.
And they're basically eventually start dying off in horrible ways. But the thing that bugs me about this whole thing is, number one, it's a Japanese game set in medieval Europe where it was predominantly white. So when people are talking about having people of color in the game, I'm going to point
just
out...
to stress on that point, it was
Yeah?
predominantly white. That means there were people of colour, but they were exceptionally rare.
Exceptionally rare and would have been pointed at and probably chased with sticks, right? Because racism is a thing. And they're forgetting medieval Europe, Crusades, you see a people of colour, you immediately think they're a Moor or a Saracen, they're the enemy. Okay? People have forgotten their history of medieval Europe. The time of the Crusades and things like that.
Well, historical knowledge and geographical knowledge for a lot of people it leaves a lot to be desired.
Yeah, and number two, I didn't see any criticism of people of colour when it came to things like God of War.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, there's that suggestion that slaves are solely people of colour.
The
So
majority of slaves historically have been white. The word
what
slave
about
comes from the word Slav.
what about Vikings who took other white Europeans as slaves and sold them?
The
The
Romans did the
Chinese
same
who were
thing.
slaves and enslaved themselves. The Japanese who enslaved the Chinese.
Well, I mean,
Um,
look at the Chinese who went to America and were basically enslaved and forced to build the railroads.
yeah, it's the history of humanity is a history of violence and slavery. Everybody has been slaves at some point in time. Everybody.
Yeah, and the irony is that a lot of people don't seem to understand that a video game is telling a story. Okay, and yes, there are white slaves in there, but because there's no people of color and no people of color who are slaves, somehow it is setting back race relations by 60 years. No, it isn't.
No,
I would
not
say
even
get
close.
over yourself and your own arrogance. No, it isn't. It's set at a time when in Northern Europe, if you saw a person of color, they would either be a merchant who you didn't trust, or they would be the enemy because the
Yeah,
Crusades were happening.
yeah. It's a very narrow perception of history to
Yeah,
suggest something like that.
and this is the thing. In the game, there is actually there's an area called the Dalmatian Republic, I think it is, where they have characters who are very clearly, brown skinned or toned skinned.
Mediterranean.
Well, let's say Mediterranean to North African,
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
Moroccan,
I get your idea. Yeah,
Egyptian, that sort of thing. But olive skinned, brown skinned, or light brown skinned, that sort of thing. Maybe not as dark as I am, but they do have definite melatonin showing. Is it
yes.
melatonin? I keep thinking melamine, but melamine is a type of plastic.
You're making. I think it's melanin, but you've completely confused me, and I'm really doubting myself.
I don't know. I'm confused. Anyway, so they do have people who have skin color in the game, but for some reason that skin color isn't dark enough.
They're not realise the racism what the skin's
No,
not
they
dark enough for
don't.
them to be racist, for them to be slaves.
But
Okay.
that's what. Well, not even for them to be slaves, because all the slaves in the game are white, which is the reflection of how it was in Northern Europe at the time.
Yeah.
Right. There are some things that I have to say that kind of right. When you look at a game like God of War, and I'm going to use God of War as an example because I don't honestly recall any people of color in God of War Ragnarok.
God of War is set in the sort of the multiple realms of Norse mythology,
Yeah,
and Kratos himself is Spartan, and Sparta is part of the old Greek domain, one of the
yeah.
many islands and independent states.
Well, it was
And
Southern Greece, yeah.
Greek people had a sort of light brown
Well,
tan.
very,
So,
very, very light brown. I mean, Greek people historically have been like white or light brown.
and everybody in the God of War saga, it was white. I'm not just saying Kratos, because Kratos has the ashes of, I think it's either his family or his enemies cast upon his
His
skin.
family, isn't it?
So he's not exactly, he's ultra white, but there's a narrative reason for him to look like
Yeah,
that. But beyond him, yeah, everybody was just generic white. It's,
yeah. But nobody criticizes God of War for not having brown people or black people.
I mean, it was in like Greece, which had a lot of sort of North African interaction
Yeah,
because they're
I
very
mean,
close to them.
does Resident Evil 4 have any brown people or black people in?
And it takes place in Spain, which is again a very sort of racially cosmopolitan country.
Maybe there's one or two characters who are brown or black in the game. I don't recall.
Nah, they're all white
You know,
except Ada Wong.
who is Chinese
Yeah,
or Japanese or Korean? I don't know.
a name like Ada Wong that suggests she's Chinese. But
Yeah, but anyway, putting those two games to one side, coming back to Final Fantasy 16, and just this idea that you can't be racist because you're criticizing something for being racist, so you yourself can't be racist,
it's
is
kind of like the
just,
snake eating its own tail, isn't it?
yeah, it is an Ouroboros
It's
thing.
suggesting that something is racist. You're revealing your own racism.
Yeah.
which is an interesting gambit.
So, do you know what the weird thing is, right? There was some research done last year, in October of last year, and it was done as part of a study, and it was only a small study um, by the Department of Psychology at the University of Texas in Austin and an organization called Take This in Seattle. And the study was called Not Just a Game: Identity Fusion and Extremism in Gaming Cultures. And it was only a small scale study, but what it looked at was how susceptible people who identify as gamers are to extremist behavior. One of them in particular being racism.
I
Do
think
they
I know this.
understand?
I know this study with the rise of the alt right and this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but do they understand what racism actually entails? And do they understand when they themselves are being racist by supposedly calling out what they believe is racism?
Yeah. Racism
And
is a very simple thing. It's the othering of somebody for having a different colour skin or from a different
yeah,
ethnic
or
background as you.
marginalizing what they do because of where they're from or the
Yeah,
color of
yeah.
their skin. Which,
Basically.
it's not just the othering of them; it's marginalizing
The
what they
othering of
do,
their experiences. Yeah.
their experiences, the things that they make,
Hmm.
in
Yeah.
particular. And it's like at one point people were saying, "Don't buy Japanese cars."
Well,
That's a racist statement.
I didn't know that, but okay, yeah, it is absolutely.
That's a racist statement. You're saying all cars from Japan are somehow bad.
Yeah, and it's also here's another one. For a long time, a lot of British people just blanket said anything that the Germans do, produce, or are
Yeah.
is bad,
Well, I mean, the most racist thing is Germans have no sense of humor.
which is ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a patently ridiculous statement.
It's racist.
Yeah,
Of course it is.
you know.
You can have
I
white on white racism just as you can have brown on brown racism and black racism.
Yeah, and I would argue that given in the world that the majority of people are not white, I'd say person of color on white racism far outstrips white on person of color racism globally.
Just by percentages of the number of
Just
people,
by
yeah.
just by population head.
Yeah.
You know.
And also, I mean, translating that into video games, it's so counter. For myself, I can't really recall many. I can't really recall many games where the lead character was anything other than a white guy. Very, very few. There's women, a few women, some more high profile than others, but like characters of color. The Prince from Prince of Persia, Assassin's Creed. The cast of Def Jam.
Yeah.
I'm really struggling. It's
When you talk about people of color in video games, right? You're talking
as
about
in a main role. It's just
in a main role. You can talk about games like Afro Samurai.
that's an adaptation, so does it really count?
Well, the main character is, a black samurai.
Yeah, but fair enough.
But then again, when you look at games where a person of color is in the lead, one of the problems you've got is that if it's a Western developer making it, there would be accusations of racism if there's any inaccuracies in how it's depicted. So when you've got what was that recent samurai game that was out?
Ghost of Tsushima, which was
Yeah,
complimented by Japan
yeah,
because they said it'd never get made in Japan because I think it was the guy who made Yakuza. He claimed that the lead character was ugly, but
yeah,
he specified further than that. He didn't mean ugly. He just didn't mean bishy, a pretty boy. He
yeah.
just looked like a normal guy. That game
Which
won't get
is
made in Japan.
which is exactly the point, because a lot of the characters, when you look at the Japanese, Korean, Chinese game industries, they want to make the lead character into kind of a poster child. They're designed to sell merchandise. It's an offshoot of the entertainment industries in those countries. You have to understand how those industries work.
Yeah.
because it's very different to how it is in the West.
I can't remember the name of the guy from Ghost of Tsushima, but he's just a guy.
Yeah, but that's the thing. You can Ghost of Tsushima is a very, very good representation of, the Japanese samurai kind of thing. But if you look at other samurai games, like Way of the Samurai and stuff like that, it's always kind of the comic relief characters who look a bit plain or outlandish or ugly, per se.
I mean, Where the Samurai is such a left field pull. I can't really remember anything of it, but I think they were all a character created
Yeah.
rather than a computer company. Well, not
No, I
computer
mean,
company.
the
But rather
side
than
characters,
design
that are
characters.
designed, they're all, especially the comic relief ones, they're all kind of capering, normal looking or ugly looking toady type characters.
Yeah, when you say that every main character in Japan has to have a sort of pleasantness about their appearance, I was just running through them in my head and I thought, oh my god, it's everything. Even Yakuza, all of the Yakuza. It's
Think about it like this, okay? And gonna loop it back around. Final Fantasy VII. Why does
yeah.
Cloud have to look like that?
Where is it supposed to be set that? Because
Yeah, but my point is, why does Cloud have to look like that? Why does Tifa have to look like that? Why does Aerith have to look like that? They have to look like that because they're designed to sell merchandise.
yeah,
It's at the back of the mind. Video games do not make money. Merchandise does.
yeah.
It's basically, think about it. It was. I know it's a throwaway
Wow.
line in the Spaceballs movie, but it's exactly the truth. When they meet yogurt.
Considering that, Ghost of Tsushima was a baller move, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why I have a lot of respect for the people who made Ghost of Tsushima.
Yeah.
But
But
then,
it all matters, it is we're talking about the video game being racist, but this is effectively about representation, because
yeah,
that is one of two matters in this whole video game racism debacle. But it's the most surface. It's the one that you see first, because what a character looks like
yeah,
and what the characters look like, it's the first impression of any game.
yeah. I mean, let's put it this way. There are very few games where the lead character is going to be facially disfigured in some way. If you look at something like Geralt, right, from The
Well,
Witcher 3,
he's not
no,
physically
he's got a
disfigured.
scar over one eye, but
He's
it
still a
becomes an
pretty boy.
affectation. Yeah, he's still a pretty boy.
Yeah, he's a very pretty boy.
Whereas if he'd actually, if he was actually wearing an eye patch that made him look a bit more strange,
It
maybe
drew
he wouldn't.
attention to it a bit more, yeah.
Yeah. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
But by the same token, what you have is, and this is one of the other things about the whole aspect of racism in video games. You have this thing where, and we mentioned it in other episodes, the video games industry is very, very America-centric, not Western-centric, America-centric, right? Yeah. And the problem with that is that they don't understand how much research other countries and other developers do when they are looking into certain things, right? I know for a fact that, and I know this from things that have come out in Japanese media, when it comes to manga, anime, films, that sort of thing, how much research Japanese people, Korean people, Chinese people do into Western timelines. If they're setting a film or a book or a comic or a cartoon in a specific time period, they will research the crap out of that.
Oh yeah, because there are societies where education is hugely important.
But America isn't.
No, I've just going back to TikTok. I've seen videos on TikTok where English is in from England, the UK, go to America as exchange students, and it's so easy for them. It's kind of like the 3 or 4 years behind where they actually are. That's how slow a pace it is. Yeah. I'm not saying all American schools, but the American schools that those videos are highlighting.
Yeah, and this is the thing. I mean, you see them on like videos on YouTube and TikTok and things like that, where they stop somebody in the street and go, "How many countries in Africa can you name?" Texas.
Well, no, I mean, you say that, but there's a woman an African woman who was very, very funny on TikTok, who takes all the questions and has a very sarcastic answer and goes, yeah.
Yeah,
But the fact is, those questions where they go to American streets and say, can you name a country in Africa?
yeah,
And it's scary how many say Wakanda.
yeah. I know, and this is a fundamental problem because it is all about education and it is all about how much you pay attention to what's going on in the rest of the world. The majority of Americans live inside this bubble that is called the United States of America, and they are
Yeah.
completely, utterly, scarily unaware of the rest of the world. So when
Just,
they
just,
see
just to
things,
explain that a little bit, the justification that those people have for never even leaving America is the country they live in is so big. Why
yeah,
do they need to go anywhere else? And the poverty in certain places of it as well explains a
yeah,
lot of things. But at the same time, those are two things that exist elsewhere.
yeah, exactly.
It's
Um,
not exclusive to America.
so here's the thing, right? You have a country where the people are suffering from um, inept education standards and a lack of uh, an external perspective,
Hmm.
right? And into that country, you have these games that are coming from other countries where it's showing a very, very different thing to what they would expect. Say in Final Fantasy 16, white people are slaves and are dying horribly, not black people, but they've grown up with this idea that black people were slaves in America, and that's all they know.
Well, the word slave is its origin is the word Slavic and slave. That's the sort of
Yeah,
etymology of the word.
because historically, the majority of slaves historically have been white,
Hmm.
but that goes against what they've been taught and what they see in America in their bubble.
Yeah, just to expand on that, the Jewish people in Greece. There's another example of predominantly white slaves.
Yeah, and this is the thing, right? When it comes to this idea of racism in video games, the fact that the video games industry is so very, very heavily leaning towards or controlled by America and the American press
Egypt, sorry, not
industry,
Greece, but
yeah,
okay.
yeah, the American press, the American video games industry, American companies, all of these things, because of all of that, you have this very, very I would say it's actually quite scary um, idea that is creeping into video games that you cannot be something other than what America's perception is,
Well,
because
it's
automatically
to look
you're
at
in the wrong.
to look at it another way. You look at countries like China and not China. No, I guess China too. China, Korea, Japan. A hugely homogenized society. We're talking about 90% of the people were born in those
Yeah,
countries. But culturally, they are very, very eager to look at stuff from other countries.
yeah,
Very eager. You look at some of the biggest like fans of British music, Japanese people. Japanese people travel from Japan to see a band in England. That is beyond the pale.
yeah. And
Whereas
you look,
I
I
think
mean, you look at
In America, everything is homogenized in America.
yeah,
Everything is American.
yeah,
There's imports, but we're talking minor stuff. Most of the
exactly,
culture, most of everything is America. We call it the American bubble, don't they?
yeah.
And that explains so much. Things that fall outside this American bubble, accusations that aren't true are thrown at it.
Yeah, and the awful thing is that because the American press has such a hold, the American video games press in particular, so sites like Kotaku and unfortunately Eurogamer, Games Industry, all these other sites, Rock Paper Shotgun, they all are the San Francisco-based bubble that you mentioned before in previous episodes. Um, they all fall into this category of viewing the rest of the world the way they want it to be, not the way it actually is or the way it was historically. So
Yeah.
when I see Kotaku or Rock Paper Shotgun or whoever else going, "Oh, I don't like this game because it doesn't have people of color," I have to ask: Are brown people not dark enough? don't we exist as well? And at the time it was set,
Yes, you
any
do,
black
Rob.
person, no, any black person would have been classed as an enemy in Northern Europe. And it's a completely fictional world. The fact that they can use magic and turn into these giant kaiju type creatures should indicate it's not Earth.
Pinch of
But you want,
salt. Yeah.
yeah, but you want people of color because you feel that there is no representation. It has characters who are gay in the game and openly kiss each other in the game.
Which is a huge deal for a country as conservative as Japan.
Yeah. So I don't understand where this whole thing is coming from.
Yeah, it's certain quarters of the video game community have to always be fighting.
Which comes back to that study I talked about extremism in video games and how people who identify as gamers, and this is again one of the reasons why I hate the term gamer, because they're not the only people who play video games. People who identify as gamers are a minority when it comes to people who play video games.
Most people, video games are just a part of a diet of other stuff.
Yeah.
A little bit of music, a little bit of movies, a little bit of
gamers
whatever.
like to call them filthy casuals. I would say they're not filthy casuals. I would say they're normal. You're not.
Yeah. Well, that took a turn, didn't it?
All I'm saying, look, let's end this there, but with this parting shot. If you think something like Final Fantasy 16, with its representation of white slaves, is racist, then I would suggest that you yourself need to take a step back, and re-examine what you think racism is.
Yeah.
Because it's obviously not what you think. There are a lot more layers to it. It's a lot more of a multifaceted thing. It's not a cut and dried. If you have people of color in a thing, it automatically isn't racist.
It reminds me of a bit on a British comedy show, Live at the Apollo, I think it was.
Yeah.
There's a black South African comedian who says the racism in this country is very interesting. There's lots of is it or isn't it racism. It's very, very interesting. Whereas in my country, there's signs like no blacks allowed. My racism is very straight, very direct. And I thought,
that was Trevor Noah, wasn't it?
It's not Trevor Noah.
Was it not?
No. But it was like, yes, a really good point.
I mean, this is the thing. When I was a kid, that was literally how racism was when I was growing up.
Yeah.
It was literally, you were called out. That was it. It was like ripping off a plaster, or getting your legs waxed or something like that. Initial pain, and then it was gone. You forgot.
Can't remember who that comedian was, but it wasn't Trevor Noah. But yeah, that's the point. Racism is explicit.
Yeah.
It's not up to interpretation.
Yeah.
It's explicit.
I know so many old people from various different ethnic backgrounds, and they are all, to a man or a woman, racist in some way. But, and here is the thing, right? They've basically grown up in a different world, so they don't know any better. And I wouldn't say it's too late for them to change, but I would say I don't want them to change, because at the end of the day, it's not my place to make them feel uncomfortable when they've raised their kids, they've paid their taxes, they've lived their life. It's the life that they lived. And you know what? I know people who, have called me all sorts historically, but I can sit there and have a cup of tea and a conversation with them, and they might call me various racist names, but that's just the way they speak now.
Okay. So that's the note you're ending it on.
Not quite.
Because that's a weirdly anticlimactic.
All I'm saying is, all those internet warriors, all those gatekeepers of video games, oh, you can't have this in a video game, or you can't have that in a video game, or you must include this in a video game. Get over yourselves.
Yeah. I think the way I'd word it is all of these people that were trying to champion rights for other people. Maybe consider what the other people want. And also, you have enough of your rights being trampled yourself, so stand up for your own rights. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Could have worded that better, but yeah. Support the strikes. There you go. There's the way I ended it.
Anyway, that's the end of the episode. Let us know what you thought about this. Yeah, we ended kind of rambly at the end there, but yeah, I think it's one of those topics that you can't just cover in one episode. It is a long conversation rather
Yeah.
than a one and done thing.
Yeah, we
And
recorded this previously, racism in video games, and it took a very different direction. So we can do this episode again in a very, very different way and in a more
yeah,
industrial level. So it's racism and video games are so well linked.
yeah,
It's
and we
yeah,
only touched on the American bubble towards the end of the episode. There's a whole lot there that we haven't even gone over.
yeah, on the industrial level. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a whole
so we
thing.
may revisit that at some point in a future episode.
Yes, if you've got anything to say about this conversation, which I assume you will have because we went there. Oh, we went there. Please do
Yep.
comment below. But even if you disagree with what we said, please do consider giving the video a like and subscribe because it helps us very much. And we are but a rebirthing channel, I think is the way to word it. But also check out our Patreon, all sorts of stuff going on in there. A podcast, I should say, that I do called Uncut from the Video Aisle. We have Pop Screen Plus, which is extra episodes of a podcast that you can find on this channel with Graham. And also written articles about unseen Asian movies, X-Files, and one coming up for Red Dwarf. So there's all sorts of things happening over there, and there'll be a link to that in the description. But until next time, with whatever else we need to get off our chest, I'm sure it'll be horrible. We'll see you in the next video.